Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud long enough to know that the game is never really about the game. It is about people, who they are, how they treat others when they think nobody important is watching, and what they reveal about themselves when the pressure is on. He has seen generosity and pettiness, grace and selfishness, all of it playing out under the same bright studio lights. But on one particular afternoon, he witnessed something that he said, years later, he would never fully forget. Two families stood on that stage. One had money, connections, and the easy confidence that comes from a life where very few things have ever gone unexpectedly wrong. The other had calloused hands, alarm clocks set for 4 a.m., and a dignity so quiet and deep that most people in that room would not recognize it until Steve Harvey made them look directly at it. What happened when those two families met on live television is the kind of story that reminds you what character actually costs, and who is willing to pay for it. Raymond Okafor was 58 years old, and he had been cleaning other people's buildings for 31 years. He had come to the United States from Nigeria in 1989 with a university degree in civil engineering, $300 in his pocket, and a sponsor letter from a distant cousin in Houston. The plan had been straightforward: find an engineering role, build a career, send money back to his mother, and eventually bring his younger siblings over. Within 6 months of arriving, he learned that his foreign credential would require years of additional certification, that the certification process cost money he did not have, and that the cousin who had sponsored him had moved to Canada without leaving a forwarding address. Raymond adapted. He took the first job that was offered to him, night shift custodian at a commercial office complex in southwest Houston. He told himself it was temporary. The temporary lasted 3 decades, not because Raymond lacked ambition or ability, but because life kept arriving with other demands. A wife, Adiz, who worked as a home health aide, 2 sons, a mortgage on a small house in a neighborhood where the schools were decent and the neighbors looked out for each other. Medical bills when his older son needed surgery at 14. His mother's funeral expenses when she passed in 2003, paid for across 12 months at $80 a month. Raymond had never stopped pursuing his engineering certification. He had completed 2 of the required exams. The third sat on his calendar for the following spring. His younger son, Emeka, now 22, was in his final year of an engineering program at the University of Houston, the dream Raymond had carried for 30 years, transferred intact to the next generation. It was Emeka who had submitted the Family Feud application. He had done it as a gift for his father's 58th birthday, writing in the application that his dad was the hardest working man he had ever known and deserved one afternoon of pure joy. The producers had called 3 months later. Raymond, who almost never took days off, had requested the Friday of taping as personal time, the first personal day he had taken in 4 years. He arrived at the studio in a charcoal gray suit he had bought for Emeka's high school graduation and kept in a dry cleaning bag ever since. Adiz wore a deep green dress. The boys, Emeka and his older brother Chidi, were dressed sharp. They looked as a family exactly like what they were, people who understood that some moments deserved your best. The family on the other side of the stage was the Harrington family from Scottsdale, Arizona. Preston Harrington was 55, a commercial real estate developer with the kind of tan that comes from spending weekends on a boat. His wife Candace was polished and precise. Their 2 adult children, Logan and Brittany, had the relaxed posture of people who had never waited long for anything. The Harringtons were not cruel people in any systematic sense. They were simply people who had spent so long surrounded by others exactly like themselves that they had lost the habit of looking carefully at anyone who wasn't. From the moment both families took the stage, the difference in their circumstances was visible. Not because Raymond's family announced it, they did not, but because the Harringtons, in small and probably unconscious ways, kept acknowledging it. A glance at Raymond's suit that lasted a half-second too long. A smile exchanged between Logan and Brittany during Raymond's introduction. Nothing overt, nothing that would survive a formal complaint, just the accumulated small signals of people who had already decided what they were looking at. Steve Harvey noticed. He always notices. The game opened smoothly. Both families were competitive, and the first 2 rounds went back and forth without incident. Raymond answered questions with a deliberate, measured pace. He was not a man who rushed, and each time a correct answer landed on the board, the Okafor family responded with restrained, genuine pride. Adiz clapped with her fingertips pressed together. Chidi bumped his brother's shoulder. Raymond himself would give a small nod, as if confirming something he had already known. It was during the 3rd round that Preston Harrington made his comment. Raymond had just delivered an answer. He said broom in response to a question about tools people use to clean, and it landed on the board for 12 points. A good answer. An obvious answer, some might say, for a man who had spent 30 years with a broom in his hand. Raymond acknowledged the points with his usual quiet nod. Preston leaned toward Candace, and in that particular way that people do when they believe a stage microphone is directional and forgiving, he said, "Well, he would know, wouldn't he?" Candace pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. Logan, who had heard it, smirked. Brittany had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. Raymond Okafor heard it. Adiz heard it. Mecca, standing closest to the Harrington side, heard it clearly enough that his jaw tightened, and he took one short breath through his nose, the breath of a young man deciding whether to respond. He did not get the chance. Steve Harvey had been standing at the center of the stage. He turned, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the full and deliberate weight of a man who has decided that the next thing he says will be the most important thing said in this room today. "Excuse me," Steve said. Not to the audience, directly to Preston Harrington. "I need you to say that again so everyone can hear it clearly." Preston blinked. The smirk that had been forming on Logan's face dissolved completely. The studio, which had been warm with game show energy 30 seconds earlier, went very quiet. Preston started. "I know what you were just," Steve said. His voice had not risen. That was the thing about Steve Harvey in those moments. The volume never went up, but the weight of every word doubled. "You looked at this man, this family, and you thought that was funny. So let's talk about it openly, since you started the conversation." Preston Harrington was not accustomed to being addressed this way in a public setting. His face moved through several expressions before settling on something between embarrassment and indignation. "Mr. Harvey, I didn't mean any. Let me finish," Steve said, still quiet, still level, the kind of calm that is more serious than anger. "This man," he turned and gestured to Raymond in the open, respectful way he had, "got up this morning, put on his best suit, and brought his family here. His son applied for this show as a birthday gift to his father. This man has worked for 30 years to give his children a life. His son is weeks away from graduating as an engineer." He paused. "And the first thing you wanted to do when Raymond gave a right answer was make sure your family knew he was a janitor." The studio audience had gone from silence to the specific kind of stillness that means everyone is paying very close attention and nobody wants to break the spell. Raymond Okafor stood at his podium. He had not moved. His face was composed in the way that a face becomes composed after decades of practice, not emptied of feeling, but governed by something stronger than feeling. He was looking at Steve Harvey with an expression that was difficult to name. It was not gratitude, exactly. It was something closer to recognition. Adiz, in the family row, had her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at her husband. Emeka had his eyes on the floor, the way young men look when they are trying not to cry in a public place and are almost succeeding. Preston Harrington was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, something had changed in his voice. The property developer confidence had gone out of it, replaced by something rower and less rehearsed. "You're right," he said. "That was beneath me, it was beneath my family, and I apologize." He turned to face Raymond directly, which was clearly not easy for him. "I'm sorry, that comment was disrespectful and you didn't deserve it." Raymond Okafor looked at Preston Harrington for a measured moment. Then he said 4 words that the audience would later describe, in interviews and comment sections and conversations around dinner tables, as the most dignified thing they had ever heard on a game show. "Thank you, let's play." The audience came to its feet. Not gradually, all at once, in the way that only happens when a room full of strangers has collectively decided that what they just witnessed deserved that response. Steve Harvey stood back and let it happen. He did not try to narrate it. He simply nodded slowly like a man whose faith in something important had just been confirmed. When the noise settled and the game resumed, the atmosphere in the studio had fundamentally shifted. The Harringtons played the remainder of the match with visible humility, none of the sidelong glances, none of the quiet commentary. Preston answered his questions and stepped aside. He was not a bad man. He was, as it turned out, a man capable of being corrected. The Okafor family played the second half of the game with an ease that had not been fully present in the first half. Raymond, liberated from the weight of what had been said, was sharper. He buzzed in twice in the final round, both times delivering top 3 answers. Emeka hit the board on a question about family traditions. Chidi, who had been the quieter of the 2 brothers all afternoon, landed the answer that sealed the main game for the Okafors. When the final buzzer sounded, Raymond Okafor raised both arms, not a wild celebration, but a full, unhurried raising of both arms, like a man finally setting down something very heavy. Adiz was crying. The boys pulled their father into a group embrace that held for several seconds longer than television usually allows. Fast money. Emeka went first, steady and focused, and scored 156 points. When Raymond stepped to the podium for his turn, Steve Harvey stood beside him for a moment before the clock started. "Raymond," Steve said quietly, just between the two of them, "this is your moment. Everything you've worked for, it's been leading to moments like this." Raymond looked at him. "Every moment has been leading to every other moment," he said. "That's what I've learned." Steve Harvey stepped back. The clock started. Raymond answered 5 questions in 20 seconds with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime paying attention to how the world actually works. His final answer to the question, "Name something that makes a house a home," was one word: sacrifice. It was not the #1 survey answer. It came in at #2, worth 29 points. But it pushed the Okafor family's total to 227, enough to win the $20,000. And it was the answer, more than any other, that the audience remembered. After the win, Steve Harvey did not rush to the next segment. He brought Raymond and Adiz to the center of the stage and sat with them the way he sometimes does when the moment is too large for the usual format. "Tell me about Emeka," he said. "Tell me about your son becoming an engineer." Raymond looked at Emeka, standing a few feet away, and something in his face shifted in the way that faces shift when a man who rarely allows himself to feel the full weight of his own life finally lets himself feel it. "I came here to be an engineer," Raymond said. "The paperwork, the credentials, it took longer than I expected. It is still not finished." He paused. "But Emeka will finish it for both of us. We'll walk across a stage in May with an engineering degree, and everything I carried for 30 years will have meant something." Emeka pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling. Chidi put a hand on his younger brother's back. Steve turned to the camera. 31 years, he said. "This man has cleaned buildings for 31 years every day without complaint, so that moment in May could happen. And somebody in this studio thought that was something to laugh at." He let that sit for a moment. "Let me tell you something about work. There is no such thing as work that is beneath a person. There is only work that gets done and work that doesn't. Raymond Okafor has done his work every single day. His children are his result. That $20,000 is his prize, and that dignity he carries, nobody gave him that. He built it himself, one shift at a time." The audience applauded. Raymond shook Steve's hand with both of his, the handshake of a man who means it. When the episode aired, the response was swift and enormous. The clip of Steve confronting Preston circulated widely, but the moment that carried furthest was Raymond's 4-word response. "Thank you. Let's play." Those 4 words appeared on T-shirts, in graduation speeches, in motivational posts shared across every platform. A pastor in Atlanta built a Sunday sermon around them. A high school coach in rural Tennessee printed them on the wall of his gymnasium. The Okafor family's story spread beyond the clip itself. Local Houston media covered it first, then national outlets picked it up. Emeka gave a short interview in which he said his father had taught him, by example, that the measure of a man is not what he does for a living, but how thoroughly and faithfully he does it. The interview was shared widely in engineering communities, in immigrant family networks, in blue-collar forums where men and women who worked with their hands recognized something true in what Emeka said. Preston Harrington gave no public statement. He reached out privately to the Okafor family through the show's producers. The nature of that communication was not disclosed. It was reported, months later by a Houston journalist who had spoken to the Okafor family, was that the Harringtons had made a private contribution to Emeka's university engineering program in Raymond's name. Whether that was penance, genuine remorse, or some combination of both, only Preston Harrington knows. But it happened. Steve Harvey spoke about the episode in several subsequent interviews. He was consistent in what he said. The moment had not been about shaming Preston Harrington. It had been about making sure Raymond Okafor did not walk off that stage without having his dignity publicly acknowledged. "That man came in with his dignity intact," Steve said. "I just made sure he left with it intact too. Everything else took care of itself." In May of that year, Emeka Okafor graduated from the University of Houston with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. Raymond and Adiz were in the front row of the family section. Raymond wore the same charcoal gray suit. When Emeka's name was called and he crossed the stage to receive his diploma, Raymond Okafor, the man who had cleaned buildings for 31 years so this moment could exist, stood up. He did not whoop or call out. He simply stood at his full height, and he stayed standing until his son had shaken the dean's hand and walked back to his seat. Several people around him stood too, not knowing exactly why, just sensing that something was being marked. The $20,000 from Family Feud went toward 3 things: Emeka's remaining student loans, a new set of tools for the resource center at Raymond's workplace that helped custodial staff pursue secondary education, and a modest vacation, the first the Okafor family had taken together in 11 years, to Lagos, where Raymond showed his sons the street where he had grown up and the school where he had first learned to love engineering. Raymond still works as a custodian. He has his third certification exam scheduled. He says he will sit it this autumn. Emeka, now working as a junior engineer at a Houston infrastructure firm, calls his father every Sunday without fail. On those calls, according to Adiz, they talk about engineering problems the way other fathers and sons talk about sports. The dream did not die. It simply took a longer path than anyone planned. And the man who carried it did so with a consistency and a quiet grace that, on one particular afternoon under studio lights, the whole country got to see. Steve Harvey said it best in the closing remarks of that episode, before the credits rolled. "We measure success by money, by titles, by the square footage of a house. But the man standing to my left has built something that none of those measurements can touch. He built a family that knows what work means, what sacrifice means, and what it looks like to carry yourself with dignity when the world is not always treating you with the dignity you deserve. That is the American dream, not the shortcut version, the real one." Raymond Okafor nodded when Steve said that, just once. The same small nod he gave every time an answer landed on the board, the confirmation of something already known. Some men announce their greatness. Others simply live it, shift by shift, year by year, until one day the world pauses long enough to notice. Raymond Okafor did not need the world to notice, but it is better for all of us that it did.